Okay, so this is the next part. Another trope that we're finding in children's books and also through the dominant narrative, adoption as a magical cure. So it's a false alternative to infertility. During my 7 years of trying to get pregnant and carry a child to term, a lot of people would say, gosh, this is really hard. Why aren't you just adopting? And particularly the word just. It was, if it wasn't said out loud, it was implied. Why not just adopt? And these are always people who have not gone through the adoption process, do not know that series of rejection and loss and being evaluated and who's allowed to adopt and who isn't. So it's reduced to the idea that adoption is both glorified as the saviors who adopt and also reduced as not that hard, even though it is. I mean, for some people it's not, but it's also a false alternative. And also, yeah, so that idea of like an adopted child, maybe I mentioned this, as a door prize for when you can't have a biological child, that is messed up. No child is a second option. Like, there are children. We love them, however we acquire them, and you don't just like pick one as a like an option B. It doesn't work like that. So adoption is also placed as a false alternative to abortion, which the adoptee and activist Liz Laddie, and I will link to her website, points out that adoption is not an alternative to an abortion. It's an alternative to parenting, which is 100% true. And that is a right you have to give your child up for adoption. It's a right you should have to adopt, but it is not an alternative to adoption, to abortion. Those are separate things, and this glorification of adoptive parents is a way of trying to celebrate that narrative to make it more appealing instead of adoption, when you're actually making these have a relationship that they do not have. My refusal or my choice to have an adoption has nothing to do with my choice to give my child up for adoption. Make sense? Okay. Now, it also erases the physical and emotional impact on adoptees, on the gestational and first parents, on the birth community that they would have lived in, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, and their siblings, and also the impact on their adoptive parents. Now, one of the things that we do in transracial adoption is we fetishize our children. We discussed this a little bit earlier. But for instance, I volunteered for a time with an organization called the Mass Adoption Resource Exchange. And they have these little product pages for each child, and they're disgusting because they've got a picture of the child just so you can verify their race. And then their first sentence is their age, their gender, and their race, as if you're like picking out a laptop. Like, you need to know how much RAM it has. And the idea of like their race being so vitally important to when you're scrolling through this list of like 200 children who need homes, and you're choosing your child and who you want to connect with, that being the primary issue of it's an issue, right? So one of the things that we do, one of the things that I have noticed, and I don't have this book with me, is such as books like What Will You Be, Sarah Me, another book written by a white person who has adopted a Korean daughter. It's centered on the girl's Doljanchi, which I think is how you pronounce it. It's like a first birthday. It's a celebration. It has a lot of cultural and historical connections to it, and it's a gorgeous, awesome celebration that the author just kind of like uses as a background to make it colorful. And one of the characters in the book says, girls can be anything in America, which is bullshit. And also, she's a Korean girl in America, which is double bullshit. So this idea of, again, glorious kingdom, backwards place full of, heathens or something, and this idea of rescuing them into a better land is another common thought. And these parents are either overtly or subtly reminding their children of how they were rescued from poverty or from being abandoned or from natural disasters. And then it builds that feedback of like, you should be grateful and you have no right to have any ambivalence about this idea, about what has happened in the development of your family. Is the same idea behind adopting black boys. That colorblind fallacy falls into place. The idea that you can nurture, we have a problem with angry black men are going to jail. So if we have a problem with angry black men going to jail, maybe what I'll do is I'll take one of those boys out of his black community where there's cultural wealth and people who can teach him about staying safe while navigating whiteness, and we will just nurture the aggression out of him. And it doesn't work like that because they don't go to jail because they're aggressive. They go to jail because of over-policing. Okay. Black girls are still difficult to place, obviously, because racism, sexism. Anyway, we're saving them from communities of color, right? That's the trope in there. And I've seen maybe one book where it's like an Asian mom and a black dad, and they adopt a child of color. But for the most part, they're all white parents adopting children of color. So there's also something to be said for a lot of transracial adoptees will talk about primal wound theory, which is a book and a theory developed a while back. And I can't speak for them. We'll save that for another one, the next one. Okay.